Awakening strips away who you thought you were far more than it adds anything new. The old identity doesn't politely retire. It unravels, sometimes beautifully, sometimes violently, until you can no longer pretend to be the character you once defended with such seriousness. What really changes when you wake up is not the world out there, but the one who thought it was standing behind its eyes, separate and in control. That someone begins to fall apart, and in that falling apart, something much wider and more intimate shines through. My name is Alan Watts, and for as long as these lips have been flapping, the question that has fascinated me most is very simple. Who, exactly, is this you who is supposed to awaken? In the mid-20th century, when people had fewer gadgets but just as many worries, they came to my talks hoping for a technique, a method, a ladder to climb toward enlightenment. Today the costumes have changed. You may listen on a glowing screen between notifications, but the longing is much the same. You want to know, what happens if I really do this? If I meditate, inquire, surrender, go all the way, what will become of me? The revolutionary suggestion is that awakening is not a glorified self-improvement project. It is more like a controlled demolition. The structure that collapses is the myth of a solid, separate, permanent me at the center of experience. Personal transformation, in this light, is not a polishing of that self, but a gradual and sometimes abrupt discovery that the self you were trying to fix is a story told in the present moment. Useful, but not ultimately what you are. When this is seen, life does not become bland or meaningless. On the contrary, it becomes more vivid, because you are no longer watching it from behind a mask. The central principle is this: awakening does not change what you are. It changes what you take yourself to be. Deep down, you have always been awareness, the open, choiceless presence in which thoughts, emotions, sensations, and the whole circus of life come and go. But from early childhood, you were taught to contract that vastness into a little point called I, located somewhere behind your face, stuck inside a bag of skin. You were given a name, a history, a role, and you learned to identify so completely with this bundle that you forgot the larger field in which it appears. Waking up is simply the reversal of that forgetfulness. I did not discover this in a single blinding flash, but in a series of small betrayals of the old story. There were moments, looking at a sunset over the bay, or listening to a piece of music, when the sense of being a watcher, over here, dissolved into the watching itself. There were times in meditation when thoughts paraded past like clouds, and it became obvious that they were not little homunculi speaking truth, but impersonal ripples. There were also times, let us be honest, of intense fear, when the ground seemed to drop away and the question arose, if there is no solid me in here, who will steer the ship? There are three particularly destructive misunderstandings about awakening that keep people stuck at the level of decoration. The first is that awakening will turn you into a permanently blissful, morally impeccable, emotionally invulnerable being. You will walk on air, speak in aphorisms, and never again lose your temper in traffic. This fantasy is charming and utterly unrealistic. The second is that awakening is a purely intellectual rearrangement. Collect enough clever insights, memorize the right quotes, and you are done. The third is that awakening will give you control over your thoughts, over your emotions, over life itself. The secret, and it is both unsettling and liberating, is that true awakening shatters control rather than enhances it. You discover that life was always moving on its own, that the sense of a separate controller was an afterthought, a commentator claiming authorship of what the body-mind was already doing. You still think, feel, choose, and act, but they happen in a larger context, like waves moving in an ocean, not arrows fired by a general. You do not become incapable of suffering. You become incapable of believing that suffering defines who you are. Let me make this less abstract with a story. There was a man named Eric, in his late 30s, who came to one of my talks looking very much like the sort of person the world would call together. He had a respectable job in finance, a tidy apartment, a gym membership, and a life plan. Underneath, he was quietly cracking. "I've done everything they said," he told me afterwards. "I set goals, I worked hard, I improved myself. I've even been meditating every morning because all the productivity blogs say it's good for focus. But lately, something strange has been happening during my sits. For a few seconds, sometimes longer, it feels like I disappear. There's just breathing, sounds, colors. When it ends, I feel both peaceful and terrified. Part of me thinks this is what they call awakening. Another part thinks I'm losing my mind. What is happening to me?" I asked him. "In those moments when you say I disappear, is there still experience?" He nodded. "Very much so. It's vivid. But there's no one narrating it. No Eric." "So," I said, "perhaps it is not that you disappear, but that the story of who you are takes a break. The character steps off stage, and there is just the stage, seeing, hearing, sensing. Awakening is nothing mystical in that sense. It is simply seeing that the story is not the whole show." He frowned. "But if I'm not the story, who am I? If I stop identifying as Eric the achiever, won't I lose my motivation, my direction?" "Consider," I replied, "that much of your motivation has been driven by fear. Fear of failure, of being nobody, of disappointing others. Awakening will indeed dissolve some of that. It may feel for a time like you are losing your grip. But look closer. When you are not frantically trying to secure your image, what remains is a quieter movement. Curiosity, creativity, a natural impulse to participate in life. That movement does not need a frightened ego to push it. In fact, the ego often gets in its way." I suggested a specific practice. "For the next 30 days, I said, when you meditate, instead of treating disappearing as a problem or an achievement, simply notice what is present when the commentary falls silent. Then, during the day, whenever you remember, ask, who am I right now without my story? Not as a riddle to solve, but as an invitation to feel the raw experience of being alive before the labels. You will still play the role of Eric when needed, but you may not have to squeeze yourself into it so tightly." He agreed, mostly because he was curious and a little desperate. A month later, he described a subtle but significant shift. "My life hasn't exploded or turned into rainbow light," he said. "I still go to work, still answer emails. But something is looser. When I catch myself rehearsing a conversation or replaying an embarrassment, I ask, who am I if this script is just noise? For a second, things open up. The anxiety drops. Then, of course, the story comes back. But now I know it's a story. It doesn't own me in quite the same way." He also noticed that some behaviors began to change on their own. He stopped overworking quite so obsessively. He found himself listening more during meetings instead of constantly crafting his image. "It's as if," he said, "some part of me was always exhausted from holding up the mask. When I let the mask slip, even for a moment, there's energy available for other things. That is what it looks like when the old self begins to fall apart in an office, in a city, in an ordinary life. Nothing spectacular, just the gradual recognition that the one you thought you were is a role being played, not an eternal essence. The transformation is not from bad person to good person, but from tight identification to a lighter touch. If Eric's cracking was quiet and internal, the next story concerns a woman whose old self fell apart all at once. Her name was Sophia. In her early 40s, a painter who had always prided herself on being fiercely independent. "I built my whole identity," she told me, "around being the strong one, the one who doesn't need anyone, who can handle anything. Then, last year, my mother died. My long-term relationship ended, and my gallery dropped me in the space of 6 months. It was like life took a sledgehammer to everything that defined me. I went from, I've got this, to lying on the floor, sobbing, with no idea who I was anymore. Friends told me to stay positive, to manifest better things. That felt obscene. I didn't want a pep talk. I wanted to know what was left when all the costumes were ripped away." I asked her, "In those moments on the floor, when you say you had no idea who you were, Was there still awareness of the crying, the pain? She nodded slowly. Yes, there was this strange sense of watching. Like the grief was enormous, but also happening in something bigger. I can't describe it well. It scared me. Of course it did, I said. You were touching the place before the old Sophia story. The art, the relationship, the strong persona, all valuable, all beautiful, were part of a costume. When they were stripped away, you glimpsed the naked awareness underneath. For someone who has been identified with the costume, that nakedness feels like annihilation at first. She looked at me sharply. So are you saying I should be grateful my life fell apart? Not in a sentimental way, I replied. Pain is pain. Grief is grief. Awakening is not about pretending otherwise. But sometimes, the collapse of the old structure creates an opening through which you can see a deeper truth. That who you are is not limited to any particular set of circumstances. The question is not whether you should be grateful. The question is whether you are willing to look at what the collapse has revealed. We spoke about a simple but powerful practice. For the next 30 days, I suggested, set aside a few minutes each day to sit quietly with whatever you are feeling. Grief, anger, numbness. Instead of telling yourself stories about it, I'm ruined, I'm starting over, I should be further along. Gently ask, what is here if I don't resist this? Feel the sensations in the body. Notice that awareness is big enough to hold them. Then, once a day, do one small thing that expresses who you are now, not who you were. A brush stroke, a walk, a conversation where you tell the truth instead of saying, I'm fine. She looked suspicious. And that will make me enlightened? No, I smiled. It will make you honest. Enlightenment is just a fancy word for being completely, uncompromisingly here. Over the next month, she discovered that her grief did not vanish, but it changed flavor. When I stop fighting it, she wrote, it feels less like an enemy and more like a wave. It comes, it peaks, it recedes. In the middle of it, there is this strange stillness that watches. I started painting again, but from a different place. Not to prove anything, not to impress. Just to see what wants to come through these hands now. It feels raw, but real. The old, strong Sophia is gone. Something softer but somehow stronger is taking her place. This is another way the old self falls apart. The persona you spent years constructing, resilient, competent, invulnerable, cannot survive certain earthquakes. When it cracks, you may think you are losing yourself. From another angle, you are losing only the shell. What remains is more fluid, more receptive, less convinced of its own story. So what really changes when you wake up? Your job may not change. Your relationships may or may not change. Your habits will change, but often slowly. The main transformation is in the reference point. Before you lived as if you were an isolated subject peering out at an objective world, constantly trying to manage, defend, and improve your position. After awakening, even in small doses, you begin to sense yourself as the field in which subject and object dance. You are at once more intimate with life and less entangled in its dramas. Spiritually, you could say that awakening reveals you as both less and more than you imagined. Less, because you are not the separate heroic individual you thought you were. More, because you are not confined to that individual either. You are as vast as the space in which clouds appear, as intimate as the sensation of your own breath. In a practical sense, this changes how you relate to personal transformation. You stop trying to fix yourself as if you were a broken object. You see that many of your so-called flaws are simply strategies the old self developed to navigate a confusing world. Some of those strategies can be gently retired. Others can be repurposed. All of them can be seen, and in being seen, they lose some of their unconscious grip. Now, you may be wondering, this all sounds poetic, but what can I actually do to participate in this falling apart in a sane way? So let us outline a simple 7-step practice for 30 days. a way of cooperating with awakening instead of resisting or glamorizing it. Step 1. Once a day, pause and ask, what story about myself am I believing most strongly right now? It might be, I am behind, I am unlovable, I am special, I am a failure, I am awakened. Write it down if you can. Just naming it pulls it into the light. Step 2. Gently test that story. Ask, is this absolutely true in this moment? Or is it a thought passing through awareness? Feel the difference. The body will often relax slightly when you recognize a story as a story. Step 3. Spend 5 minutes each day sitting quietly, eyes open or closed, simply noticing sensations, sounds, and thoughts as they arise and pass. Whenever you get caught in thinking, do not scold yourself. Just notice, thinking is happening, and return to raw experiencing. You are training yourself to recognize that you are the space in which phenomena come and go. Step 4. Once a day, deliberately do something that slightly contradicts your old identity. If your story is, I must always be productive, spend 10 minutes doing nothing useful and feel the panic and freedom. If your story is, I am unworthy, look someone in the eye and speak honestly about something vulnerable and feel what happens. These small acts loosen the grip of the old self. Step 5. When difficult emotions arise, fear, shame, grief, practice saying inwardly, this too is awakening. Not as a way to bypass the pain, but as a reminder that no state is outside the dance. Feel the emotion in the body. Notice that it moves. Notice that awareness does not flinch. Step 6. At the end of each day, recall one moment when you felt even a small glimpse of being more than your story. Perhaps in nature, in laughter, in stillness. Write a single sentence describing it. Over time, these sentences become a trail of breadcrumbs, showing you that awakening is not rare. It has been flirting with you for years. Step 7. Once a week, ask the scariest question of all. If I did not have to prove anything about myself to anyone, what would I feel moved to do more of? What would I feel moved to do less of? You do not need to change your life overnight, but let the answers whisper their way into your choices. This is how the new pattern, life living itself through you more freely, gradually replaces the old pattern of you chasing an image. Now, before you vanish into whatever awaits you after this video, turn the light of attention gently on your own experience. Where in your life do you feel the seams of your old self tugging and fraying? Is it in your career, where the role you worked so hard to inhabit no longer fits? In your relationships, where the persona you used to play feels hollow? In your inner world, where the beliefs that once comforted you now seem too small? If you feel moved, share a line or two about that in the comments. Not as a grand testimony, but as a simple seeing. Here is where my old self is wobbling. Here is where I suspect awakening is quietly at work. If this exploration has given you even a slight shift in how you view personal transformation, if it has eased the pressure to become a shinier version of your story, and opened a kinder curiosity about what you are beyond it, consider staying with us on this journey. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next dive into these peculiar matters of self, reality, and freedom. If these words resonated, give this video a like. That small gesture helps this message reach others who may be quietly terrified by the feeling that their old self is falling apart and need to hear that this is not necessarily a disaster, but perhaps the beginning of something truer. And if someone came to mind as you listened, a friend in the midst of a life collapse, a loved one who says, I don't know who I am anymore, share this video with them as a gentle companion. As we come to a close, you'll see 2 other videos appearing on your screen. 2 different doorways into this same mystery of awakening and personal transformation. One may speak more to your questions about identity, the other to your struggles with fear, control, or love. Trust whichever one draws you, and let your own curiosity guide you to the next step. Thank you for lending your ears, your attention, and your very human uncertainties to this conversation. May you remember, again and again, that when your old self falls apart, it is not the end of you, but the end of mistaking the costume for the dancer, and that what you truly are has never, for a single moment, been in danger. When the old self starts to fall apart, the temptation is to rush to rebuild it. You feel the familiar structures loosening, your role, your beliefs, your idea of where your life is going, and some deep reflex says, "Quick, put it back together, or you'll be nobody." Awakening invites you to do something far more radical, and at first, deeply uncomfortable. To pause in the rubble and look around. To notice that even as the story dissolves, you are still here. Something is still unmistakably present, aware, capable of feeling and responding. The you that is falling apart is not the only you there is. This pause is not passive. It is the beginning of a new kind of participation in your own life. Instead of assuming that any feeling of groundlessness is a problem to be fixed, you start to get curious. What if this confusion is not a sign that I'm failing, but a sign that an old map no longer matches the territory? What if this ache is the space where a deeper honesty is trying to grow? These questions don't make the fear vanish, but they change your relationship to it. Fear becomes weather in the sky of awareness, not the sky itself. Personal transformation, when seen from this angle, is not a one-time makeover. It is a rhythm, contraction and expansion, building and crumbling, forgetting and remembering. There will be days when you feel clear and spacious, and days when you feel like the most tangled version of your old self. Awakening doesn't eliminate these swings. It wraps them in a wider understanding. You begin to see, this is just today's wave. I don't need to draw permanent conclusions about who I am from this. That simple recognition saves you from countless inner battles. It also changes how you meet other people. When you know intimately what it's like to have your own self-image shaken, you become less eager to judge others for clinging to theirs. You can watch someone defend a role, the tough one, the victim, the expert, and instead of thinking, they should be more awakened, you might find yourself thinking, I know what it's like to be afraid of letting that go. Compassion stops being a moral obligation and becomes a natural byproduct of seeing your own process clearly. None of this makes you a saint. You will still snap sometimes, still get hooked, still say and do things that don't quite match what you know in your quieter moments. The difference is that you catch it sooner, repair more quickly, and carry less shame about being human. You realize that even your regressions are part of the curriculum. The old self doesn't die in one dramatic scene. It retires in phases, often stumbling back onto the stage for a surprise performance. Awakening lets you smile, bow politely, and escort it gently off again. So, perhaps the most practical question you can hold as you go on from here is a simple one. Where in my life right now is something trying to fall apart that I keep holding together? Is it a role at work that no longer feels true? A way of relating that demands you hide your real feelings? A belief about yourself that once felt protective but now feels too tight? If you feel moved, share a glimpse of that in the comments. You don't need to write an essay. A line like, "This is where my old self is cracking," is enough. Naming it out loud is often the first compassionate act you offer to your own transformation. If this exploration has resonated with where you are, if it has made you a little less afraid of your own unraveling and a little more curious about what's underneath, consider staying close to these conversations. Subscribe to the channel so you can return to this perspective when you forget it, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next dive into these very human questions about self, change, and freedom. If something in this talk touched you, give this video a like. That small gesture helps this message find its way to others who might be standing, as you are, in the dust of a collapsing identity and quietly wondering if they're going mad, when they might in fact be waking up. And if someone came to mind as you listened, a friend whose life just fell apart, a loved one asking, "Who am I now?" share this video with them as a gentle companion on a difficult stretch of road. As we come to a close, You'll see two other videos appearing on your screen right now. Two different doorways into the same mystery we've been circling here. One may speak more to your questions about who you really are. The other may speak to your fear, your relationships, or your sense of purpose. Trust whichever one draws your eye, and let your own curiosity lead you to the next step. Thank you for lending your ears, your attention, and your very real uncertainties to this conversation. May you remember, again and again, that when your old self falls apart, it is not a sign that you are failing at life. It is often a sign that life is inviting you to stop playing such a small role in a much larger dance, and to discover the one who was never just the mask,